Hi, this is Kate from Generate Magic, and today I want to talk about something that seems really obvious on the surface, but I think it's something that a lot of us tend to overlook, and that's the fact that we've been manifesting our entire lives, and whether we realize it or not. But sometimes when we learn about manifestation, we actually start making it more complicated than it needs to be, and also sometimes it can actually create a lot of struggle. So when we learn about it, we typically think that it's just going to be the shortcut. I think that's one of the appeals of it. And also I think another appeal is this whole idea that we can control everything. And so when I first learned about it, I thought, well, it's kind of like a slot machine. Like you go to the casino and only it's not like a casino, like a true casino where it's built on chance, but rather it's always a guaranteed outcome. And so you put your coin into the machine, and the coin is basically your desire, and then you pull the lever, and the lever is the process or technique that you're using, and then out pops your fulfilled desire. And so out pops the bag of money on your doorstep or out pops the soulmate. And so then when things don't exactly work that way, sometimes we give up, or sometimes we think that we're doing it wrong, or we think that this is just bogus, or this is all a bunch of crap. And these are definitely all things that passed through my mind. And in truth, it doesn't usually work out that way. I don't want to say it doesn't always work out that way, because of course there's always exceptions, but usually it doesn't quite work out that way. And on top of that, I think if it did, life would actually be very boring. And so we think we want to always be in control, right? And we think we always just want everything to happen instantaneously and just at the snap of a finger. But in truth, I know it's a cliche, but it's so true that the joy is really in the journey, not in the destination. And the way I think of it, it's not even necessarily about time, and it's not about action. I think a lot of times this is also where the overthinking and the overanalysis comes in, and the endless debates over what is it that causes this, right? And people, just kind of get in endless debates about how long it takes and about whether or not action is required. And I think all of that is kind of, again, besides the point. And the way I look at it, it's like we're vessels of the divine. And it's like this beautiful orchestration is taking place. And I like to dance, and so I think of it as like a dance with the divine. And all the events that are unfolding in our lives, some people call it the bridge of incidents. But I like to think of the events as being part of this beautiful dance and part of this beautiful orchestration. And the more you just see everything as being on the path, and more than that, you see the tangents as the treasures, and you see each individual event that's happening in your life as something really beautiful and something to really be cherished. I think the more and more you'll actually find joy in this entire process. And we use a lot of terms, right? Like wish fulfilled, or living in the end, or higher self. And I get it. I use these terms too, because sometimes we have to use language to clearly communicate. But at the same time, I think sometimes we tend to kind of take these terms a little bit too literally, and it creates a sense of separation. And so thinking of the end, or thinking of your higher self, sometimes, at least to me, it kind of creates this sense of separation. Like something is always just around the corner, or something's always just outside of myself, just out of reach. And so the more I've learned to just see everything as part of the unfolding, and everything as something to be treasured in and of itself, the more and more I just find joy in these daily occurrences. And it's less about getting to this desire, less about getting to this end destination, and it's more about enjoying the treasures in each moment. And so I think when we we kind of put certain requirements on how something is supposed to happen. And so saying, for instance, I'm supposed to meet my soulmate at a yoga class, or I'm supposed to receive my money through the lottery or through an inheritance. By putting these requirements on our manifestation, it's really cutting us off to all these other possibilities for how it can unfold in our lives. And more than that, it's also just cutting ourselves off from the joy that we could actually be experiencing in the process. So for instance, let's say you're refusing to work because you have this whole idea that the only way that you can receive your money is through this inheritance check. And so you believe that actually getting a job would actually maybe delay the manifestation. But in truth, maybe that job is the thing that truly ends up lighting up your life and bringing you that fulfillment and that sense of joy and that sense of driving passion more than that money ever would. And yeah, and same thing with a soulmate, right? And so by saying it has to happen this certain way, not only are you cutting yourself off to all the other ways that it could potentially happen, but you're also cutting yourself off from all these beautiful experiences that you could be having. And again, I want to try to refrain from thinking of all these things as separate categories, right? So thinking of manifestation as somehow being a separate category from just ordinary day-to-day living, because again, we're always manifesting. And so I want to give you an example of something in my life that happened before I knew anything about manifestation or Neville Goddard or law of assumption, but I think it fits in very well to this whole discussion. And so this has to do with health. And so when I was in my 20s, I started experiencing seizures very unexpectedly. It's not something that I had experienced before. And I already had all these ideas about the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry, as many of us do, and for good reason. And so I had all these ideas that the pharmaceutical industry was evil. And on top of that, I had read all these stories specifically about epilepsy and about seizures, and how seizure medication not only didn't work, but it had all these horrible side effects. And so I had all this resistance around it. And so I thought, there is no way I am ever taking medication. I was very stubborn. And so, again, I didn't know about the law of assumption. Maybe if I did, maybe things would have turned out differently for me. But I was very much into natural health at the time, and so I was trying all these other things. I was trying energy medicine, homeopathy. I was trying, I saw a hypnotherapist, and I'm not saying any of these things were wrong, and I actually really benefited greatly from the hypnotherapy sessions that I did in many ways. And so I'm not knocking any of these things, but despite doing all of these things, these seizures were still coming up. And so then I actually found myself in the hospital, and several times I was hospitalized for the seizures, because sometimes, when it would happen in a public location, people would understandably be very freaked out, and so they would call the ambulance. And so I would come regain consciousness, and I would find myself in an ambulance or in a hospital. And so this particular time, when I had the seizure, I actually hit a bookshelf, and I actually cracked my head open and broke 3 of my teeth on top of that. So that's why my bottom teeth are actually broken, was from this incident. And so when I was in the when I was in the hospital, the woman who was I don't remember if she was my nurse or my doctor, but she was talking to me, and somehow, I don't know how it happened, but we got to talking, and I had told her that I had been experiencing this for a couple of years at this point, but I was still very much under the belief that medication would not work for me. And so then she told me that she also had epilepsy and that she was taking this medication called zonisamide, and that it worked for her, that it actually, um, she no longer had seizures. And I had never heard of this medication before. It was a newer medication. It was not one of the more well-known ones. And so as a result, I did not have all these built up assumptions. Notice assumption is coming into play now. And so I didn't have all these built in assumptions about this particular medication because I had never heard of it before. And on top of it, it was very persuasive having somebody actually tell me personally one-on-one that this medication had worked for her. It was very powerful into creating the assumption that this medication would work for me as well. And so I very much believe that God had a hand in this. And yes, I do believe that God is within us, but also that God is basically kind of orchestrating all of these events through us. And going back to this whole idea of dancing through the divine, right? And so I very much believe that she was put into my life by God to teach me this lesson and to open me up to this other possibility of taking this medication. And so I'm very happy to report that since being on this medication, I have not experienced any seizures other than when I actually was not able to get it. And so then I did have a seizure because I was off of the medication. But, but the medication has been very effective in preventing my seizures. And on top of that, I have not experienced any noticeable side effects through it. And so the moral of the story is not to close yourself off to possibilities and to all the ways that the universe is constantly working through you. And I don't want you to get mixed up and to think that somehow this medication was the source, because I think sometimes we can kind of make that mistake, right? To think that one thing, one kind of external thing can be the quote unquote answer, or the quote unquote source to all of our desires, whether it's a medication, whether it's a supplement, or whether it's a manifestation process, or whether it's a particular guru or a technique. All of those, right, are putting our faith in outside sources. So it's understanding that the power is within us, right? That it's not in the source, but often these outside sources are part of this orchestration. And so not to close ourselves off to anything, to be open to everything. And the more we approach our lives with this openness, the more joy we'll experience in our everyday lives. And I like to, just every morning just ask myself, like, how can it get even better than this? And just really just being open to the joy in each moment. And so that's what I want to leave you with today, is always never giving up on your desire, but more than that, really just taking pleasure in each individual moment as it unfolds, and seeing everything along the quote-unquote bridge of incidents as part of the manifestation and as something to be cherished and treasured in and of itself. So thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.